Serious, ex-neo-Nazis and racist skinheads of Reddit. What changed your mind? When and why did you leave? My story is a bit different from the others here. I was a skinhead since I was a kid, about 13. We ran in a gang and listened to both racial music and also non-racial music. We were a bit mouthy etc about race, but the place we grew up in was totally white. There was one Chinese lass out our whole school, about 1,200 people. It didn't take me too long to realize that they took our jobs talk was a load of shite as there were no ethnic people and no jobs. So I did grow out the racist thing myself pretty quickly. It was only really when I went to university that I actually encountered different races. I got to work beside black and Asian guys, played football with Africans and Greeks and generally had a great time and met great people who I still keep in contact with. I think even though I didn't consider myself racist, I couldn't imagine me having black friends or going on holiday with a group that included several Muslims, which I did do a couple of years back. Funny story before I end about prejudices. I went to live in another city and was just myself. Talk to anyone. One night I got a cab. The driver was a Muslim in full Pakistani cultural gear, skull cap, long gown etc. I thought, people are people and have the right to do or dress how they want, but I don't think we are going to have a lot to talk about, not much common ground. I gave him my address and sat back to chill out. Guy turns round, "You a Scot?" I said, "Yeah mate." Then he starts chatting about when he first came to England in the 60s before the majority of Pakistanis he used to get picked on at school. The other guys who were picked on were Scots and Irish, so they formed a gang of the 8 of them. From that day they could go watch football, go out at night, and generally stick up for each other. He said, that was a long time ago, and I still get a shiver when I hear Scots or Irish accents. Now he teaches kids at the mosque not to dislike white Christians, and the best ways to mix and interact. We sat for 20 minutes when we arrived at my house and just shot the breeze. I think that's when the last bit of bigotry left me. Whoa. Thanks for the replies and gold. Now I'm very anti-racist and try challenge wherever I go. I really liked those last couple paragraphs. I'm a little bit younger than most of the posts at the top, and it's probably less interesting too, but I'll throw my experience in anyway. I moved to London when I was 6, from Poland. Back in Poland everyone was racist to a degree. I never really thought about it. The fact that Muslims were the cancer of the earth, blacks were just the poor scum of society act was just accepted as a truth. Racism in Eastern Europe is pretty bad. Anyway, I moved when I was about 6, maybe 7, to a housing estate in South London, and what I saw disgusted me at the time. The amount of minorities around where I lived was huge. I remember just starting secondary school, age 11, and quickly falling into a group of friends who were primarily European, all of which shared my uneducated views. Like I said, I was poor and so were they, and so we put the blame onto anyone we could. It's just how it was. For the next couple years I was constantly in trouble for fighting and making trouble with other kids, and they were almost always black. I was a real shithead at that age. At 15 one of my friends was stabbed by a gang member, and I just felt angry and let down, blaming other minorities more than ever. When I got a bit older, and I was studying at college, not university, the 2 years before university is called college or 6th form in the UK, there were no other Eastern European people in my class. I was one of 3 white people, the other 2 being English, the rest being black or Muslim. I felt isolated until I was forced to sit next to a kid called Tristan, stereotypical South London ghetto black kid in every sense. He was involved in gangs, selling drugs and for the first week I didn't talk to him at all, but I realized that actually, despite what I saw in him when I first met him, he seemed like a nice guy, so I started talking to him a bit, and I realized that all the crap I'd been through, getting caught up in violence, drugs and everything else that came with Anyway, he became one of my best friends. and my 18th birthday was coming up, so I told him he should come along to it. Parents got some money together and hired out the top room of a pub near where I live. Well, you can imagine what happened. My attitudes had changed a bit, so I didn't think much of it at the time, but my old friends started getting violent towards him and his girlfriend who he'd brought. I saw all those people from a different light, and I haven't spoken to them since. I'm in my second year at university, and I'm still trying to kill any prejudgment of people that hangs over from how I used to think. If anything, the people I prejudge most are Eastern European. Sorry for the length. Just thought someone might like reading it. There's much better stories at the top though. Thanks for reading if you did. Throwaway because a lot of my friends read it and know my username. Sorry for bad English. It is not my first language. Some backstory. I was in a hardcore racist organization from 15 to 20 years old. They recruited me off the school grounds. I had been in brawl with some Arab immigrants and felt strong resentment against them, and the organization really sounded like they made a difference. Like they could stop them and others who would destroy the country. I shaved my head and started to wear the clothes. We used to vandalize immigrant hotels, places they lived just when they came to the country, and stores. We would regularly get into large fights with immigrants and communist socialist groups. I really freaking hated those people. Every day had something to do making their life difficult. Every day something related to this fight happened. Such was life in the organization. I was content with the hate. I was sitting on the bus on my way home one day. I was listening to some good music in my headphones. It was a cloudless autumn day and everything was a healthy yellow and orange color and blue sky. At a stop, an African man and a young boy, maybe 5-6 years, got on. The man was tall and had bad clothes. He looked like he did not have much. They sat in front of me. I immediately became annoyed and started to think about how I hated them. Freaking immigrants coming to my country. He is poor and I pay taxes so he can get welfare. I thought about how his son is going to become a lousy crap and rape white women. I started to get mad and decided to beat him up. I was going to follow him when he got off the bus. I saw him press the button and got ready at the next stop. And just before we stopped, I was about to get up and the man turned to his son and said something in a heavy accent that I will never forget in my life. "I love you, my son. Be good." He then gave him a big, hard hug and the boy got off the bus alone. He waved goodbye and sat back down, with his hands on his face. I just stared out the window where his son had been standing. My worldview came crashing. He was just a father who wanted his son to be good. He loved him just like my father loved me. For some reason this changed everything for me. I know this is a very small thing, but I started to think about how he wanted a better life for his son. He was a man that had changed everything for his family. I sat on that bus for hours. It kept going around. I thought about how wrong it was to do the things I had done. I left that city the next day and started over. I am much happier now. I don't feel the hate in my heart every day anymore. Thank you if you read this. Okay, I'll go. I never ran with a group of racists, but I harbored some really racist views for a long time. Listened to RAC, basically Nazi punk rock a lot, and frequented the Stormfront boards. I realized eventually that being filled with hate all the time was having a really negative impact on my life. At the same time that this thought crept into my head, I started working in the oil patch in northern Canada. I ran into a lot of people who were extremely racist, who said things that even I didn't agree with, and even met some guys who identified themselves as neo-Nazis. It struck me that one of the common things these guys shared is that they were dumb. Maybe someone knows some smart racists. I never have actually met one. It got me thinking about my future, about the kind of people I wanted to be around, about the people who I wouldn't have in my life, white people, if they knew I had become a full-on racist skin, and about having a bunch of idiots as my sole peer group. I really didn't want that, so I worked hard on changing. I threw out my bully boys CDS. I went back to school, in a course with many different cultural groups, and realized that most of the time, these people that I hated were a lot more like me than they were different from me. And towards the end of my course, I stopped at a car accident, where a car full of Middle Eastern people had flipped off a road. They had kids and the mom inside, and they were in pretty bad shape. When I looked at them, and saw their eyes, and the fear and pain, I knew That we are all people. I could have never left those people to die. I could have never hoped for a different outcome for those people than for people of my own skin color. This didn't happen right away. It took a few weeks from the accident. I still have racist thoughts pop into my head. Driving in Vancouver can do that, but I catch them and realize it is just a reactionary response built up from years of habitual thinking, and they don't usually last all that long. I work as an EMT now, and it has been the best thing for me. It is a constant reminder that we all have the same fears and the same response to emotional and physical pain. And it has worked. I no longer think of myself as racist, maybe mildly ignorant and culturally insensitive, but no one's perfect. That family in the car ended up being okay. The paramedics and fire crew arrived on scene and extricated them. They were hurt but no one died. And I got inspired to make my own positive mark on the world and picked my career. Thank you for the gold. The attitudes I used to have are not anything I share with people now. Obviously, it felt really good to type that out. I am a black Jamaican who came here at age 12. 26 years ago, late 80s. I thought America was going to be heaven, but I landed in East New York, Brooklyn, which was absolutely freaking heck. Everyone and their uncle was a drug dealer. This included my cousins and my uncles. There were gunshots ringing nightly in my neighborhood. The sidewalks were covered in crack vials. Gangs roamed the streets. But worst of all was how I was treated by black Americans. Holy freaking crap. They hated my nerdy butt and beat it every chance they got. I used to hide in the computer lab at lunchtime, which is how I got my career. And they also hated Haitians. It actually became an accepted insult to call someone Haitian. Because of our poverty and newness to the country, we dressed poorly, and they picked on me every chance they got. I got beaten up regularly until my cousin went to prison and I got his drug dealer clothes. Then they suddenly started treating me better. After that I simply couldn't believe any black American could be a good person. I saw way too much depravity and superficiality to even imagine that there could be good blacks. Years later, during and after college, I discovered two things. 1. There are many superb black Americans, especially from the South. Many of them have iron work ethic. 2. Most of the kids who tormented me were actually first or second generation West Indians, especially Jamaican. My own people tortured and beat the crap out of me. In the face of these two facts, I simply couldn't maintain my racism anymore. Now I have friends of all stripes and I couldn't care less about a person's color. This story is difficult to share. I am typing this at the request of my son. I was raised as a racist. We lived in Southern California near a lot of minorities. My father was a union leader and I think his hatred of minorities came from his job, because the union was mostly white guys and they saw the minorities as trying to take their jobs. Whenever we would drive around and see them in the street, my dad would always point them out and talk crap about them. I grew up and had kids of my own. I was doing the same thing to them without realizing it. One day I came home and caught my 14-year-old daughter screwing around with a black kid. I threw him out of my house and beat him in my driveway. The cops were called and I went to prison for assault. In prison, I saw how ethnically divided everything was, but my counselor was the one who basically shook me out of it. She helped me realize that continuing this hatred would really only hurt my own life. I tried to avoid the racial groups in my prison. I stayed on my own and earned my GED. In my classes I met a lot of minorities who had also never graduated high school. I listened to my counselor and got to know them and realized what a hard life they had. Before, I thought that they were just lazy and sold drugs for easy money. We went through a lot of the same struggles in our education. When I got out, I started a construction company. I make an effort to hire both former cons and also minorities. I am trying to make up for the kind of things I have done in the past. I had low self-esteem and no friends. The skinheads at my school were nice to me and treated me as one of their own. I adopted their beliefs, a sense of belonging. Well, actually I was never racist. Never. I would however go along with it because I liked them. They were my friends and I did not want to lose them. Eventually my self-esteem improved enough that I no longer felt a need to conform to a group I disagreed with, just to have friends. Ironically, it was having these skinhead friends that built up my confidence. On the plus side, when I finally left the group, most of them had abandoned their racism, as if it was just a passing fad. I was in the punk rock scene in the early 90s in Cincinnati. I only knew the sharp, skinheads against racial prejudice kids. The singer in my band was a sharp kid and was always getting into fights with the racist skinheads, but I never saw it happen. I had forgotten about most of this until seeing your post. My parents are Asian and I grew up in a black community. I loved it and all my friends were black. But every time I did something wrong or bad things happened on the news, my parents would point out that it was black people's fault. For some reason their constant bad-mouthing did not get to me at all. My parents still act like this though, which I think is very narrow-minded, and I have told them that their way of thinking was old-fashioned, but they never grew out of it. By the way, in Cantonese when you say black guy it translates to black monster. This goes for only white and black people though. In Texas in the 80s, I wasn't a racist or a skinhead, just a punk rock kid who happened to live in an apartment with several skinheads and other punks for a while. Skins were always coming over and partying, starting crap in the apartment complex, and getting the cops called. A couple of the skinheads were smarter, it seemed, and cooler than the others, and I felt okay with them. I had seen several instances of them jumping blacks and starting fights with just about anyone, and it was really starting to make me uncomfortable. The last straw for me was when I was out downtown with one of the skinheads I thought was smarter and cooler. We were outside a club, and this short, chubby, gay kid came outside with two girls and were walking towards the parking lot. His only mistake was wearing a pair of Dr. Martens. The skinhead went up to him and started threatening him and telling him to take off his boots and give them to him because he wasn't worthy to wear the uniform. The kid was crying at this point. The skinhead pulled out a knife and told him to take the boots off or he would cut them off. The kid bent down to unlace his boots and he was shaking so bad. I felt really horrible for the kid, but I was also scared. He gave him the boots and left in socks, crying. The next day I called a friend and went and crashed with him for a few months. Avoided the area and all of those people for a long time. Well, forever actually. I wouldn't consider myself to have been an extreme racist, but at one point in my life I was close to becoming one. I attended a college in a downtown area. During my first years, I had built up a lot of resentment towards black people. I hated black people because of what a few did to me. When I say black people I mean black men, because I could never hate girls in general. One day I had finished my lunch and as I walked out this elderly black gentleman in a worn out suit approached me. I bluntly asked him if there was a problem. He stopped and proceeded to greet me in my native language. I was dumbfounded by this. This old man in tattered old clothes was a war veteran who fought for my people, my freedom. Vets like him paved the way for my future. I felt so ashamed of myself. This man didn't even have clean clothes to wear, and I had hated him for being black. I do not believe in coincidences in life's journey. I will never forget that moment. God bless. Bigotry runs deep in my family line. It was something we did. Woke up, ate breakfast, hate on everyone that wasn't white and Irish. We specifically hated gooks, which funnily enough was anyone Asian. I decided one day to speak with one of these gooks and lo and behold the only difference between us was skin color. So I decided that hating someone because of skin or who they frick was a game I didn't want part of. Bigotry is fricked and I have better things to do with my life to waste time hating. Unless you're a C, then black, brown, white or yellow, I'm hating the crap out of you. What was your view on Jews, blacks, mixed race people and Hispanic people? I was born in a small town in Michigan that was probably 100% white, so I didn't initially have any views on race. As a teenager in the early 1980s my family moved to a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood in South Phoenix, Arizona. In that neighborhood I was immediately set upon and beaten up, jumped, robbed, threatened and harassed at every opportunity because of my skin color. At the same time I was seeing minorities on TV talk shows talk about how it is impossible for non-whites to be racist. It all kind of was hitting me from every direction and causing me to think of everything in an us versus them white racial mentality. Were you exposed to their culture? Yes. As a teenager in the 1980s I was into skateboarding. Through skating I met a lot of kids into punk rock. At that time and place there was a lot of crossover between the punk and various skinhead subcultures, and through a friend of a friend at a party or a show or something I met some white power skinheads. Their message totally hit home with me and I ended up hanging out with them and immersing myself in their culture. How much has being a member affected? I saw lots of pretty fricked up violence. People kicking people in the faces and jumping on their head until the person's face was just an unrecognizable mess of gore. It fricked me up in the head pretty bad. I have never been a violent person and being exposed to that level of violence really freaked me out. The violence is what caused me to leave that whole scene. It really messed me up and I become something of a recluse and a borderline agoraphobic. Over the years I eventually met people of various races and ethnicities who were good, decent people, and my racism just kind of slowly melted away. Nowadays I don't have a racist bone in my body, but I still do get panic attacks when I am in a situation that I think might turn violent, even when in reality there is almost no chance of violence happening. That sounds like post-traumatic stress disorder, which would be entirely justified because the things you saw sound pretty emotionally scarring. While I was not a KKK member, I did support David Duke, the former Grand Wizard of the KKK who ran for Louisiana governor, because of his racist views. I hated how black people would walk in the middle of the road and were quick to anger, among other things, like it felt good to look down on someone else. I later came out as gay but remained a racist. I changed my mind when I moved from Louisiana to California and took gender race sexuality study classes. I realized I was racist because I didn't understand other cultures and motivations of minority groups. My new perspective was further enforced when I, too, became angry at bulls that happens to minorities and felt the need to act out. Later on, I read that the whole walking in the middle of the road thing was because humans are territorial, and people who live in the projects don't have true sense of ownership, so public things become their territory. I thought walking in the middle of the road thing was because in the ghetto it's safer than the sidewalk. Got into it around age 15. I got disillusioned by observing the actions of my peers. They would rant and rave about how minorities are leeches on society but they themselves were on welfare EI. They were drunks and none were well read or really intelligent. The ringleader was a guy in his mid-20s who was functionally illiterate and blamed his shifty position in life on everyone but himself. He stole, sold drugs, and the part that really drove me away was that he mugged people and did break and enters. He victimized people, white or otherwise. He didn't believe in anything, so I made it clear I had no interest in the scene anymore. It was at this time that local era, anti-racist action groups became aware of me. They told my high school principal about my activities and regularly hunted me down to kick the crap out of me. So ironically I was being hunted and routinely beaten by both skinheads who called me a race traitor and ARA groups that called me a racist. I was 18 at this time. I had to leave town. So I did. I moved to a city where nobody knew me and I became a different person. I was still plagued by racist thoughts and a racist mindset for a while afterwards. Until I met her. She was a beautiful, tall willowy girl with brown skin, black hair and amazing green eyes. She was mine for a couple of years and she fixed the ugly broken person inside of me. It has been many years, and she is long gone, but I think about her once in a while and I am grateful that I got a second chance. Thank you for your story. Just out of curiosity for any of the former racists that posted, did any of you who identified yourself as a racist skinhead at any point start identifying as a non-racist or anti-racist skinhead after changing your point of view? If so, how was the transition? Source: was an anti-racist skinhead in Southern California and every now and then would hear about people showing up in the scene who used to be ex-boneheads. I grew up in a pretty racist household, so I thought my dad would use the N-word frequently in casual conversation. He had worked in an urban city with several blacks. He was also quick to point out the difference between a black man and a N-word. The high school I went to was all white and Christian. There were no blacks or Jews within a 20-mile radius that we knew of. I figured out the absence of a culture breeds ignorance of that culture. We mock what we don't understand. I am now very open to other cultures but still recognize the bad stereotypes that stoked my childhood hatred still exist. My kids have school friends of color and I feel no animosity toward them or their families. I still have to catch myself from repeating things I heard constantly from my childhood. I still have friends from home that are openly hateful of blacks and are unapologetic for it. It's all about overcoming ignorance and eliminating it from your life. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.